The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Googlization Nation and the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. You see, we got a familiar face here. Keith, I still can't get used to the opening because I'm still waiting for that other split second of it, Ira Wolf and Keith Campagna. So welcome back to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization.
Yeah, buddy, it's bittersweet, right? Even I was sitting there going, oh, that's what it sounds like when my name's not there.
Yeah, every time it's like, oh, I got like another 2 seconds before I can speak, and I don't have anymore. So you gave me 2 seconds back to my life, I guess.
Right.
But we missed you, and so does everybody else. And I know our guest today, Torin Ellis, who we'll be bringing on in just a minute. We're not going to do a whole lot of intro today because we want to get to him. We want to maximize his time on here, and appreciate you being back because you formalized it. I reached out to Torin a while ago, but you have the bigger influence. So he'll be coming on very shortly. So I really do appreciate that. But it's good to be back and have you back in the seat.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't know if I have more influence, but I've got that pain in the ass sales persistence thing where I wasn't about to let him go. I mean, Torin has made an amazing, he probably knows it by now, but the influence he made when we met was legit. It was sincere. And then I watched him speak and it took me 2 years, but here we are. I finally got to talk to him a little bit more.
I appreciate that persistence and glad to hear things are going well for you as well with the ROI shop and things going on. So life moves on. We need to kind of make sure everybody, again, we appreciate everybody being here, but we're living in some challenging times. Right before the show, we're talking about even your kids. You're father of two kids. It's what's going to happen in the next couple of days or after the holidays. I know a lot of schools are shutting down. Business, it's getting pretty ugly out there. So we're pleading with everybody. It's pretty simple stuff. Take your precautions, wear your masks, keep your distance. And we do hope that everyone listening is safe. Do what it takes to get beyond this. We got those vaccines hopefully coming up, but it's not going to be an overnight fix. But we want to get back to some sense of normal, whatever that is, and we're going to hold that whole discussion because again, with our conversation today about social justice, diversity, inclusion, equality. We don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't very healthy.
Right. And for me, I have I have a positive outlook. I tend to see the positive in pretty much everything. And I can't help but think that it's because we've had to go through what we have these last couple months. As a country, we've exposed our wounds, we've exposed our weaknesses, we've exposed our strengths. And it's having Torin, I'm so happy there are people like Torin out there that actually has such a bigger stage now because, this idea of inclusion is very, very sensitive because some people argue for it. Some people argue they don't realize they're arguing against it. Then you have history that the momentum of the way businesses are run and the change with students and technology. And there's so much opportunity for good to come out of the other side of this tunnel. I don't want anyone's parents or kids to get sick from COVID. So act compassionately, put on a mask when you go outside. It's going to be cold out most of the places anyway. So just be cool, be calm. We'll get through this and listen to what Torin Ellis has to say.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, hey, I want to make sure we maximize the time and get as much out of Torin as we possibly can, because I know he has a lot to say. So we're going to bring him on. We have got, I looked at so many different places, and he sent me his bio too. He's listed as a diversity strategist, human capital strategist. He's the author of Rip the Resume. He's the host of Career Mix, which is on SiriusXM. He's the co-host of a great podcast. If you don't having a chance to listen to it, I've been listening to it in the last couple of weeks. You want to talk about authenticity, transparency, integrity, honesty, just an open conversation of stuff that's going on every week. He's co-host of Crazy and the King. So it's Crazy and the King. We'll check which one he is, if he's crazy or the king. Torin, hopefully you're there. There he is. Hey, welcome to Geeks Geezers and Googlization.
Yes, indeed. Thank you ever so much. I appreciate you all for having me. And real quick, Ira and Keith, if I can do this, for those that may have a visible disability, I'm wearing a gray sleeveless hoodie with white letters on it for mind, body, and spirit. I'm sitting in front of a piece of artwork that has about 50 to 75 different colors of burgundy and maroon. And shout out to all of the people on the LGBTQIA spectrum and their allies, because this is Transgender Awareness Week of 2020. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
And thank you. And again, it's the awareness. I mean, even though we're in, Keith and I and so many of us are in the throes of it, there's so much going on, and we still overlook it. We want to be aware of that 360. We want to be perceptive of everything going on. But so thank you very much. And Torin, I know we were talking right before the show. You've got a crazy schedule, and carving out a couple minutes to be here. Really, really, really appreciate it. I'm probably the only one that some of the things that are happening, I want to put this in perspective as the older baby boomer, or as I like to say, the old white guy. I guess it's somewhat of guilt. I mean, I remember I grew up in the 50s. I was too young in the 50s to understand anything going on, but in the 60s, I remember the riots in the streets. I remember the civil rights engagement coming in. I remember, it was terrifying. I mean, we were seeing cities burn down, and then all of a sudden, a whole other generation comes in, and people forget about that because they weren't there. But what we're guilty of, and again, being sort of the old white guy, is that, hey, things are getting better. The world is improving. We see all these things. We see laws and regulations and all these changes. And in fact, it incrementally improved, but the world advanced. And what this year did was sort of bring it all to a head. So I'm asking you, Torin, I want to kick this off because I know there's a lot of messages here. I want to kick this off. Is this different? Is 2020 truly different than what we experienced in the past? Or is this just going to be headline news? We're going to get a new administration, and then everybody's going to go back to their normal. And this isn't normal, the way we treat people.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early for us to say whether or not it's different. In the moment, we could say short term, what we feel at this particular time, we think it's different. It feels different. Folks and organizations seem to be a bit more serious around their diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives and their efforts. Individuals inside of these organizations seem to be a bit more thirsty, a bit more curious about how they are going to pursue change in their organization. But I hearken back to the 60s, and I want to remind you that the only reason why the 60s really blew up the way that it did is because we finally had some video cameras down there to witness Bloody Sunday, to witness Bloody Sunday, to witness Bloody Sunday. And so when we have camera, and we've had camera in years leading up to 2020, but when we have camera and when we have pause because we are in this catastrophic pandemic, it tends to make it a little bit different. And so the hope for me and people like me, people like you, Ira and Keith, and so many others, the hope is that this is different. But the only way that it'll be that way is that we cannot have white men that continue to be complacent, that continue to accept mediocrity. We cannot have white women baking apple pies for racist white men. We can't do that. We cannot have them baking apple pies and patting them on the back, knowing that they are doing the shit that they were doing down in Charlottesville. We can't do that. We can't have Black men and women fatigued, tired, because they've heard this narrative over and over and over and over and over again. If nothing else shows you what we can do, well, we did it this week. We have people in outer space yet again in outer space, and we are still struggling with trying to say, well, we need a business case, or we can't find Black and brown talent, or we don't know how to really bring veterans into our workplace, or we got all of these excuses. We just need to drop the excuses and figure out how to do the work.
Torin, do you think that so I know this, so I'll say it, you tell me if I'm wrong, but this has to start this initiative, this continuation of integration has to start at the top of every organization. Do you think that there are enough leaders catching on to this as a true, I'm going to say it because that's the thing that tends to get business leaders thinking, a business initiative? Or are there going to be HR leaders that get out of their comfort zone and start to stand up for what needs to be done and what needs to take place from an HR perspective? Where do you see this coming in, or probably maybe a combination of both? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm actually going to address that in two different ways. So I would say that when we think about leadership and where it should start, I want to immediately attach that to something that we always talk about, culture. And so we think that culture and leadership and HR have something to do with that. And they do, Keith. However, culture starts inside of a person's circumstance and their condition. I want circumstance and condition. So when I rise up in the morning, I have circumstances and condition that I'm in my household, just like you have in your household, and so does Ira. So before we are a leader, before we are a politician, before we are a supply chain manager, before we are a pastor, before we are any of those titles, we are an individual. So it starts with the individual. That person brings a mindset to the solution, to the equation. That person brings some intentionality and proximity and empathy and situational awareness under consideration. So sure, it starts with leadership, but Keith, it starts with the person. You got to have in your heart, in your mind, you got to say to yourself, well, we haven't done a good enough job, and whatever that is, and we can do better. And so I am going to be committed to doing better. I'm going to make sure my leadership is committed to doing better. My mid-level leadership is committed to doing better. My employees are committed to doing better. We drive it down through the organization, but we also have to push it up as well. And so I really feel like the only way that we are going to really make substantive progress is when we have every single person moving in a direction that says we're working to be and to do better.
Ira, got anything? Because I could keep going here.
No, I'm sort of blowing my mind here. So I'm struggling with how do we keep that? I get it, but how do we keep this moving? There's so many distractions going on. Tori, you mentioned in a couple places. I can't remember. I listened to so many interviews that you did, but I know one of them. One of the questions was, we responded pretty quickly to COVID, and yet, I mean, that was like overnight, and yet for an eternity, but especially for 50 years, we've been struggling to address racial inequality, social inequalities, social inequities, the whole gamut. Why were we able to flip the switch overnight in one respect, but in the other, we're still trying to figure out even how to communicate about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the way that you originally set up the first question. You set it up with how you were, or how you matriculated through your youth, entered into manhood, and then in many ways, Ira, have operated in your professional career. And I am in no way suggesting that sequence or that course, that journey is racist. I'm not saying that, suggesting that. I'm saying that we need to be more intentional. Now, Ira is intentional. Ira sees it now, and you may have seen it in the past, but it just didn't land the way that it landed in 2020. And so what I'm saying is that if organizations, every single organization figured out how within a 2-week period to take their operations from one way of doing it to a distributed, agile way of doing it, remote way of doing it, if we can do that with thousands, tens of thousands of people, equipment, and every other thing, then why can't we do that as it relates to building high-performing teams? Why can't we do that as it relates to looking at learning and development and onboarding and the hiring sequence?
Right.
Why can't we do that as it looks at corporate social responsibility and philanthropic giving and board governance and technology stacks? Every single value point in the organization should be looked at for how are we looking at diversity and inclusion? How are we looking at representation and equity? Every single value point should be looked at. And the only reason we haven't done it is because we haven't made it a priority. There are people right now, Ira, that say, you know what? Enough is enough. Right. Enough is enough. I'm one of those people. Enough is enough. And so I have a lot of organizations that reach out to me. And the first thing that they'll say is, I want unconscious bias training. And I'll say, well, you definitely don't want me. A, because I don't believe in it. And B, I'm not a trainer. You haven't even done the research. I'm a person who helps build high-performing teams, either through a talent acquisition or down from the top through leadership. Leadership that has a tranquilizer of pause in their forearm. I rip that tranquilizer out and we help them get started. Too many organizations just want to put a Band-Aid on it and just do unconscious bias training and call it a day.
Right.
Waste of time.
Yep. Yeah, what the world needs, what businesses need, and a lot of individuals isn't training. They need coaching, right? They need to see the long term. They need to recognize that expectations-wise, it feels like to me, Torin, that people think that they have to change the way they are and they have to question everything that they grew up with, right? Because we all have these unconscious biases that literally shape 60 to 70% of our or more habits every single day. And we have a tendency to feel threatened by that. And it feels like you're a passionate speaker and you have the balls and the brains to put it out there and say what needs to be done, but you've never once seemed aggressive. You're so compassionate. And for me, I love the idea of having compassion being part of the project here. If you want to love your neighbor, you have to love yourself. If you want to see change in the world, you have to make change inside of yourself. And no one, tell me if I'm wrong here, but no one's ever asked anyone to change overnight. The expectation is that this, as much as COVID changed things quickly, I don't think that's the same expectation here. It's the desire for a lot of people, but truth be told, it's not the desire for a lot of people also. So how are you helping people recognize that they could change without feeling threatened?
Yeah, first and foremost, I start every presentation and somewhere in my engagements, I try to remind people that I operate off of the two most powerful words, which are love and process. That if I love you, Ira, you really are not questioning whether or not what Torin said is of genuine or if it has any animus in it. But if you don't know that I love you, now you have to process it. Now I got to process how Torin entered into this conversation. And you tend to understand, yes, he's passionate. He moves with a great deal of velocity and energy, but that he does mean well. He cares for us, for me, the mission. So I always remind people, Keith, that love and process are the way that I'm going to always show up. The second thing that I do is I try to show people that this is a journey with no finish line. I don't want to finish doing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I don't ever want to finish that. I don't want to finish iterating on my product roadmap or on the way that we offer our products and services in our organization. I don't want any other organization. I don't want to finish. I want to always be present as it relates to being connected to humanity. How can I do better? How can I do better for people in the LGBTQ community? Ira, you mentioned, well, which one is Torin? Crazy or the king? I'm the king. Julie is bipolar. She's crazy. But we do that for a reason, because she wants people to understand that she is she is a highly functioning individual. She has a hidden disability. And as a white woman, she can get away with certain things and you may not ever see it, but she has a hidden disability. We were purposeful in naming it Crazy and the King. I want myself to be constantly submitted to, how do I do better with the audience of people with disabilities? So Keith, the answer is, it's a journey that has no finish line. I've looked at what organizations have done over the last 100 years. 100. And so even with all of that history poured into how I show up and work on engagement and speak and show up in podcasts like this, I'm still always submitting myself to, how can I be better? How can I show up better? It's Transgender Awareness Week. I got a lot to learn if I want to be a better ally for people on the LGBTQIA spectrum. So I'm even submitting myself, how do you show up better? How do I be a better human?
So Tor, I mean, just in the title, let me go back to that, because I know there's, and I'm including myself in there. So I'm even learning how to negotiate the conversation here. Is there will be people that say, well, you shouldn't have crazy in the title because that's not politically correct. We shouldn't talk about people who have a mental illness as being crazy. So how do we negotiate? You know, and you may not even have an answer, but what could you advise others of? How do we negotiate that conversation? Because there's this sense of, that's not the politically correct thing to say, or the right thing to say, even going back to your conscious bias. We need to get that out of the way. But on the other hand, is we're walking on, there's a sense of, we're walking on eggshells. I don't want to say the wrong thing. We got this whole thing going on with Black Lives Matter. Is that, it's not Black Lives Matter, or is it? Or all humans' lives matter? So then we end up in this didactic academic conversation of what's the right way to say it, and get paralyzed by not changing our behavior.
Yeah, I'm going to say to you that you're going to make a mistake. September of 2019, I was in Detroit, Michigan, standing in a room of about 500 individuals. I said 3 words, and those 3 words offended a young Black man in the audience. What I said was, in my presentation, you ain't Black. Now, I'm not going to go into the entire, scenario, but I'm sharing with you that in that moment, in mentioning those 3 words, I lost him for the entire presentation. He complained to HR and the organizers of the event, and I ended up making a donation to a nonprofit of his choosing as part of my apology. A public apology to everyone in the room, a private apology to him, a donation to a nonprofit of his choosing, period. It wasn't about my intent, it was my impact. I made a mistake, owned it, kept it moving. I haven't lost a day of sleep from that infraction. Right. So what I'm saying is that, as ardent as I am, even I make mistakes. So yes, there are some people out there that may be offended or question why we call it Crazy and the King, or some people out there in HR that want to say all lives matter, which is a whole nother annoyance for me in and of itself. But my point is, if in fact we really care about doing better, then we will table our fragility, we will table our ego, and we will submit ourselves to a degree of listening, because a condition of progress is to allow those that are suffering to speak their truth. It has nothing to do with your truth, Ira. Mm-hmm. If I'm suffering and I'm telling you that Black Lives Matter because we've had a number of infractions that suggested that they don't, shut up and listen, because I'm speaking truth, trying to move us towards progress. So it's not about fragility. It's not about our ego. It's not about being combative. It's just like, okay, well, let me at least get their perspective so I can try to figure out how to move better in this work.
Right. And this is, and no man is an island, right? You're doing a lot of work, dude, and I love you for it. what are some of the things that you're seeing become a little, maybe there's regionalized messaging and regionalized organizations that people that are listening to the podcast, because I know we're kind of whittling down our time here. How do we get this to spread this much more, Torin, every single day? What do people need to know or know about?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, it's whenever someone is listening to this, you hit share. This is a conversation that you share, and you encourage your friends to share it. See, we are quick to share, entertainment. We're quick to share something about a new piece of technology, but we are reticent. We are hesitant to share a conversation around race and relations and equity. We are slow to hit that keyboard. No, we got to share that. We got to share that. So I think part of how we do it is we got to introduce people to the conversation and let them know that it really is okay. It's okay to not know what phrase to say and did I make a mistake? It's okay for Ira to perhaps step on an eggshell, and it's all right as long as he's engaged with people that are genuine, like myself. Then you have nothing to worry about. Like, I'm only going to correct you. I'm only going to talk about it, or why do you feel that way? But we got to share it. We got to be in proximity of the information. We got to know that it is all right for us to have what we call courageous or uncomfortable conversations. One thing that I'm going to say to you, Keith, is this. I don't want to hear another CEO or executive say to me, what's the business case for diversity and inclusion? Not one. Because we revere them. We see them as being intelligent individuals, business acumen. They are sharp, top of their game. We give them all of these adjectives and character traits of adoration. We do that. Well, 3 weeks ago, Citibank released a report. And the report said that racism has cost the Americas $16 trillion in GDP since 2000.
Sure.
That if we keep doing what we're doing, it's going to cost us another $5 trillion in GDP. Now, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but 16 trillion and 21 trillion dollars is a lot of money, and it impacts a lot of our companies, a lot of the business units and the teams that we are in and a part of. Yeah. So if nothing else, you take that report and you say, I, as an organization, have to do better, which is the reason why Citibank committed $300 million towards addressing social injustice and racism and financing for Black and brown businesses and so many other aspects of living our daily life.
Hey, Torin, we're just getting started here. We can, and again, would love to have you back, continue this conversation. If not, I know other people need to keep listening to you. But before I get there, you mentioned a couple things. Love the phrase, and this came up from Joyce, who will be joining us shortly. She says, love the table our fragility. Are you familiar with Nassim Taleb? Does that name ring a bell? Look him up. He's got something called, he talks about anti-fragility.
Okay.
We talk about fragility, but we don't necessarily have a description, or we didn't talk about what's the concept of anti-fragility.
Yeah.
And it's beyond resilience. It's beyond that bouncing back. So again, when you did that, it just resonated and clicked. And what I learned today was we need to keep, it's okay to make mistakes. We talk about that all the time, but all of a sudden when we talk about social justice and racial equality and diversity and inclusion, all of a sudden it's not okay to make mistakes. And I appreciate your message is, yeah, it is. We're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, we don't have to be perfect, but I think we have to do something. And so, one thing that Keith and I, we met in September when I was speaking in Orlando, and my signature presentation for 2020 was, or is, less allyship, more action. Well, I haven't given it because I'm only going to give it when I hit a stage with a room full of people. But the bottom line and the takeaway from this conversation is we all have to be more active. We can do more than what we've done. It's not categorizing you as a bad person. It just simply says, look back, take inventory, and then figure out how you show up differently, doing more, because humanity is what's important. I'll close on the ROI of D&I is greater humanity. The ROI of D&I is greater humanity.
Torin, all people need to do is go search for Torin Ellis in Google. But what are other ways that they can get a hold of you, have a conversation with you?
Yeah, across all of social media at Torin Ellis. Real simple. I don't hide. I'm visible. I'm out there. I'm ready to roll all the time.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Torin, again, we're just scratching the surface here. Appreciate it so much. Starting the message. This will be shared. Believe me, this will be out there. Our paths will continue to cross. We live in too many inner circles that are going on. Appreciate your message. Grateful for you. And thank you for leading the way.
The wounds of honor are often self-inflicted. Honor is something that each of us is born with. Honor is something that cannot be given. Honor is something that cannot be taken. Honor is something that must only not be lost. I'm looking for people who want to operate with honor. It was said by Morgan Freeman in the movie The Last Night on Netflix. Ira and Keith, thank you for having me and my voice.
Thank you, Torin.
Appreciate
Keep
it.
doing your thing, bro. Thank you.
Very cool. Thanks. We need to take a breath from that, don't we?
Told you, the man just delivers. He's real, and it's a real concept that he's bringing to the table. I mean, Ira, it's so interesting to me because personally, I know. Listen. I was born a white male American. It's not my fault any more than I'm now losing my eyesight. Right? Like, but when I speak with my parents, I absolutely recognize what Torin was talking about. He's talking about, like, it's okay to feel like you've done something wrong, but it's not your fault. It's okay to have a sense of vulnerability. And the part that I'm really hopeful for is that these conversations kind of move through the process quickly, right? Because if people hold on to feeling vulnerable, if they feel bad about what they've done or how they were raised, I mean, it's a legitimate idea to think the people that grew up but with parents that were, could have been racist, grandparents that still they're racist. They grew up with racism all around them. It's okay to have that conversation and accept the fact that, hey, time has moved on. That model doesn't matter anymore. I don't want to minimize it, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all. It could be something that we discuss and we let it go and we open ourselves up to new ideas, new emotions. If you're walking through your life feeling vulnerable and feeling scared, if you put that down, you might start feeling better. You might start feeling love, which feels way better. So yeah, I don't Did you freeze up over there? Well, I guess I'm back to hosting the podcast once again. I think that there's something to be said too in terms of the way you see these larger organizations starting to trickle down. I really believe, I want to believe, that this isn't lip service anymore, that this is something that companies are going to continue to chip away at. And I know as long as Torin is out there doing it, there's going to be a lot more activity, a lot more things to do. There's going to be multiple reasons for companies to engage their communities, to put energies back into their communities, to open up the conversation so that individuals, both on a recruiting sense, current employees and other stakeholders, they're going to find that ROI that Torin was talking about. And since I lost Ira, I'm going to see if there are any comments here. So there's a question here. Yeah, Joyce, you want to come on in here? I don't know if I could get you in here. Yes, unmute yourself there.
Okay, great. Hey, how are you, Keith?
I'm doing well, thanks. Given Joyce show.
Yeah,
Keith Joyce show today.
Well, given the gravitas of what Torin was talking about, for us to be talking about these superficial other concepts of travel and hotels, I mean, it just seems like there's a disconnect there. And what I wanted to talk about was what each of us can do, what each individual can do to contribute to the conversation and to how we can support changing the world.
Yeah.
And I want to share with you what I'm doing. May I?
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay. So I belong to the Institute of Management Consultants, and they wanted to address Black Lives Matter when it was, people were in the streets and it was a problem. So I wrote a position statement for them, and in it said, and sadly it's gone nowhere, but in it said that we would be ready to help any government or city or any organization that needed our help as consultants to address these issues and the issues of systemic racism. And it was very frustrating for me that it didn't go anywhere. Well, so it just so happens that I graduated from a private school in New Orleans. And when I graduated from that school, there were no African-American people there. In fact, I was in high school in the era where they were creating schools so that Black people and white people wouldn't be able to go to school together. And I grew up with such a limited existence that some years later, I discovered I did have that unconscious bias that I feared that I had. And so I have made a special effort to address that. I serve as chair of the board of the Women's Foundation of North Carolina. I serve on the advisory board for a 3-tiered mentoring program in North Carolina for young women at risk who are mentored by their peers, graduates, and then professional women. And recently, I decided that I would take on a young man, and I say young advisedly because he is 39, as a project. I met him when my high school, that same school that I shared with you about, and he graduated from it. And he was also a graduate of Stanford, and he has like 3 master's degrees or something. And I'm helping him to find the right position for him. He actually is an expert in D&I, and he is going to be such an asset to some organization, and he just hasn't found the right spot yet. And I can see his potential. And so I am personally doing whatever I can, sending him notices about jobs and doing personally, that's what I'm doing as an individual. What can each of us be doing? Even if it's just reaching out within our community, there must be something that each of us can do.
So Joyce, I'm gonna answer that. But I want to put an asterisk on this and say that I am very limited in my ultimate awareness of the way the world works, right? I have my path, I have my stories, but I also have awareness that the way I think doesn't necessarily mesh with the way that things could be in their best form. But I will tell you that I have spent an enormous amount of time whittling down, maybe not this specific emotional element, but whittling down what is it that keeps people from being happy, keeps people from living the life they want. And I'm kind of I'm massaging this here internally here because it really has something to do with the way Torin actually impressed me. And that was to say that when him and I met, I was speaking for one of the first times as a professional. Like, I've always been in sales, but to be in front of a couple hundred people twice in 3 days was a little bit of a thing for me. And I got to be able to because I was speaking, I got to go to the speaker happy hour. And when I started talking, I had to introduce myself to Torin. I had no idea who he was, but I had to. He has presence. And when I started telling them about my life work integration project, which is Joyce, life work integration is my passion project where I truly want people to find ways to live a life they feel is worth living. And the number one thing that I've noticed that keeps people from doing that is they don't know what they want. And so I'm going to tie it all together, and I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to just say, it's listen. The answer is listen. And if you are the one that's unhappy, listen to yourself. If there's someone in front of you that's unhappy, what do? We listen, right? The person that person that's talking or expressing themselves, when someone listens to them, they get it right away. And Joyce, Torin, when I started telling him about my passion project, I knew from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, Torin was listening to me.
Yeah.
No surprise to me that he carries that kind of energy with him.
Right.
So it's listen intently.
When I teach this to clients, what I say is it's listening not only with your ears, but with your eyes and your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say it differently with my kids. I say, if you hear yourself thinking, just pause and then ask yourself to refocus on the person in front of you, because this is a skill. And, in sales, you have to listen. You can ask 1 million sales reps how successful they are. And then you take those same million and you get them to be tested in terms of their ability to listen, intentionally listen. And I would be surprised if it wasn't a 1-to-1 correlation. Listening is such an easy thing to explain. However, it takes time to develop. And so, I sit back, I'm blessed. 2 of my sisters are teachers. They're educators. And they are fighting and they are working hard in inner city schools because they want to help the community and they want the youth of our country, specifically in Philadelphia, to recognize that they have inner strength. And they're teaching so many skills about how to get into a system and then discover your own strengths within it. I hope that people, no matter what their race is, no matter what their income is, no matter where they started, they could take time to listen to how they feel about certain things. And like you saw in Ira, we talked about this. Like, we're talking about some heavy hitting topics here. We're talking about racism. We're talking about systemic
social injustice.
We're talking about the kind of things that it's easy to be to push back on and say, hey, it's not me. So like that, to me, I love a country, I love a world that when someone says, hey, it's not me, they stop and they go, well, maybe, how do I feel right now? Do I feel like I'm a victim, or do I feel like I might have something that I could do differently? And that's what I loved about Torin's answer, right, Ira? Just do one thing differently.
Welcome back, Ira.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for allowing me to be a guest on the show. You guys being really the experts you are, I'll have to go back and watch what the transition was. But I lost my internet, and then I basically learning agility and multitasking. Pick up my phone, get on my phone, and realize it's on wireless. So that I then got on the wireless, and then the rest of the internet came back. So, but I appreciate you guys throwing the show in the hand of the pros. So, but Joyce, it just reminds me of what we were talking about last week. We talked about empathy, and when you talk about listening, people say, well, we need an active listening course, and we need to become better listeners. Well, you can't listen without empathy. It goes back to we keep regenerating this whole conversation. And empathy is more than just standing in somebody else's shoes and looking the other way. Because if we just flip shoes and I'm looking at you and I'm listening to you on my show, have this conversation, it's like I also have to be listening to you. It's not like waiting for you to take a breath so I can get back in. You have to truly be listening, and we don't. I can't help think. There's so much we've watched over the year, but one of the more touching films or movies to understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of a Black parent, because we can think of, I grew up, Joyce, you grew up on the same culture as well. We're both have Jewish heritage. We're both, and we still go back to 6 million of our people being lost, and frankly, on my mother's side, knew 2 or 3 uncles, my grandparents, and their brothers and sisters, but 7 of them have never met. I mean, and all the relatives that came down from there, because they were all lost. But there was a dissociation. It's like that happened. Now we're past it and we're better. And then you realize we're not, because it affected other races. There was a movie that we just watched on Netflix by Kerry Washington, and it was a Broadway play. And it was literally very, very heartfelt. And it was what it's like for a Black parent to, every time their child walks out their home,
right, feel
and
that
it's like, well, they live in that, and they go, that's not the way it should be. And then it was a mixed marriage, so there was a white husband, it was a police detective, there was all these dynamics going on, and you're sitting there, just your eyes are filling up, and it's like, this is what it's like to be fearful of every time your child walks out. It's not like, be careful, watch for the crazy other driver. It is literally hey, if you get stopped, you may get shot by the people that are supposed to protect you. And that, to me, that was happening in 2020 is crazy, because you and I are the only 2 other people left on this call that sort of remember going back to, oh, that was in the 60s. We're past that. That was in the 70s. We're past that. That was in the 80s. We're past that. No, we're not.
Right. And it's interesting too to hear that story and get your perspective, because it wasn't that long ago. Dave Chappelle has been doing an amazing amount of work speaking about the idea that, he has that gift, right, where he puts it out there, how people, we got to get together, things are messed up. And if you feel like you've been neglected or not listened to or abused, so do I, and so do my Black brothers and sisters. And it's almost like you can't help, as a white guy, I can't help but think, holy shit, you just nailed it. Excuse me, Joyce, didn't mean to curse in front of a lady. But the point is, it's like,
I heard that before, I can tell.
The point is, it's like,
I was surprised you apologized.
hey, Keith, I don't want to cut you off, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I'm getting the warning. Because we're just getting started. But you're absolutely right. For anybody who didn't see Dave Chappelle, I mean, and Keith, I know you don't do a lot of TV or anything, but he just hosted Saturday Night Live. Yep. And there were a lot of people that were offended and uncomfortable with his message in the beginning. And the reality is that people needed to listen to that and say, why am I uncomfortable with this?
Yep.
One of the things that we have not talked about today, Ira, is your course in adaptability. And it's so important, because adaptability is part of how we're going to get ourselves out of this mess.
Unlearning. Yeah, one of the skills, one of the abilities is unlearning. It's how do we unlearn all the stuff that we thought was normal.
Who do I got to know to get a code so I can do this training? I'd like to go through it.
I'll check with them. All right. You got it. So
always a pleasure, buddy. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Keep doing your thing, Joyce. Great to meet you. Thanks for coming in a pinch here.
Nice to see you again, Keith. We've seen each other before.
Just in conversation, put a name with the face. Hi, Joyce. I know we didn't do. I appreciate again. Guess the follow through. I got to listen to the segue now. But I will be back next week with Ahead of the Curve. I know we'll probably whether we'll pick up the hotel hacks or something else. But you're also going to be a bigger part of the show. So really appreciate that and have a bigger conversation. So welcome that. We continue to evolve and grow, and we again. People like Geeks with Torin Ellis, very grateful that he was on, and very grateful that my internet stayed up through the
We are too, right, Keith?
So really appreciate it. For all those listening, on Friday we got a special, not edition of Geeks Geezers and Googlization, but with our mutual friend Joyce, Ed Gordon, doing our monthly Gordon report. We're going to talk about COVID-19. jobs, China, all the different reports. So we're going to get an update on from Ed Gordon on Friday at noon. You can catch that on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ira Wolf.
That's going to be a great one. So don't miss it, folks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as always, we will be back Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, Facebook, W4CY, and then on all your favorite podcasts and the replays. We will be back with Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. I don't remember who our guest is next week, but we've got some, again, heavy hitters, and we'll be continuing this conversation. As Torin said, this is a journey. There is no end. We will be talking about this. Keith, I do hope you come back and join us. You're welcome anytime. We'll be with you. And happy Thanksgiving to you, Keith. Probably won't.
Thanks.
See you then. For everybody listening, Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, I'm Ira Wolf. Got Joyce Joya and Keith Campagna today. Thank you, Torin Ellis. Hopefully everybody shares this week's message. Don't let the shift hit your plans.